To God be the glory.
Welcome back to our study, Evidence for Christianity. In today's class, we're going to talk about the harmony of science and faith. Sometimes our world considers these two concepts, faith and science, as being completely separate, divided in such a way as they are exclusive from one another. This prevailing viewpoint says that faith should not enter into a science discussion, that any religious concept must be checked at the door of the laboratory. To have as an element of your thought a belief in God while you are engaging in scientific discovery is ridiculous and even harmful to progress, or so they would say. And then there's the counterposition that also sometimes is discussed, that to engage in a religious discussion that incorporates scientific thinking or has concepts, well, that's equally absurd. Let's take a few moments and think about these concepts, science and faith. If you were to ask, what is science, to someone around you, what would the common response be? Well, it might be, science, yeah, that's biology, right? The study of life. Geology, the study of rocks and the earth and layers, right? Science is astronomy, looking at the stars and the heavens, the galaxies, and all of the processes that happen out in space. Or they might say, well, science, yeah, it's physics, it's chemistry, it's the periodic table, it's the laws of motion. Okay, well, that's a common response, and those would be areas of specific fields within science. But let's take a look at a dictionary definition for the word science. All right, the first definition that we find in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the state of knowing, knowledge as distinguished from ignorance or misunderstanding. A department of systematized knowledge as an object of study. All right, so right there in that dictionary definition, that second definition, a department of systematized knowledge. All right, that would probably be that common answer, biology and geology, physics and chemistry, right? Something that is self-contained. It's looking at one particular field or direction. But really, science, if it applies to biology and astronomy, if it applies to rocks and water as it does to life and stars, well, then science must be broad. And so we see in that first definition, we see this idea of knowledge. Knowledge that is sought after, to obtain a state of knowledge, to move from ignorance to a place of understanding. And so we might just think science, give a simple definition, is the quest for knowledge. You know, in scientific studies and endeavors, in science experiments, that is what is trying to be determined and gleaned, right? You are looking for knowledge. You're looking for something that you didn't know before. You're looking at observations. You're thinking about theories. You're starting to compile those together to have knowledge that is new to you, that is new for the processes and procedures that you're looking at. All right, now let's take the word faith, and let's think, if we were to ask the world, what is faith? You know, one of the responses that might be given is, well, faith is believing when common sense tells you not to. You know, that's a quote from a famous movie, Miracle on 34th Street. Faith is believing when common sense tells you not to. Okay, that sounds a little bit like a blind faith. Like you're putting your trust in something. You're looking at something that really shouldn't be followed, shouldn't be believed, you shouldn't put confidence in, but you do it anyway. Okay, well, if that might be a world's response to the idea of faith, let's stop and think about a dictionary definition. What does Merriam-Webster's dictionary tell us is a meaning of the word faith? All right, the first definition says strong belief or trust in someone or something. Okay? Strong belief, trust towards something. The second definition says a system of religious beliefs. Okay, so we're taking that strong belief or trust and we're putting it into a specific body, a body of knowledge or information, religious beliefs. Okay, we find the word faith in our Bibles lots, used very often. And so if we were to look back at the ancient definition, one coming, say, from Greek, from our New Testament usage of faith, what does a Greek definition sound like? Okay, well, Thayer's says that it is a conviction of the truth of anything, belief. Okay, so in this, did we see anything about common sense or ignoring common sense? No. Did we see anything about believing something that you have no ideas about? No. It said strong belief or trust. When we think about the Scriptures and we think about what is used in the New Testament, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, we have a reference to faith. Let me read it for you. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay? And here's another rendering. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. All right, now if we think about that, it's telling us about faith. It's not exactly a dictionary definition like we looked at from Webster's, where it's trying to give you a meaning. In this passage, the Hebrew writer is conveying an aspect of faith that they need to have and embody. Faith is the assurance, the conviction, all right? So an assurance, a foundation. It's what you have right now. Right? You are confident of it. You are convicted of it. That's your present situation. But how did you get to that present situation? Well, it's based on your past knowledge. It's based on your past experiences. How did you get to a place of trust, of conviction, of putting your assurance in something? Well, it's because you looked at it. You evaluated it, you saw, you made a judgment, you considered, is this something that I could put my conviction behind? And then the verse also tells us that this assurance or conviction is of things hoped for. Notice that the Hebrew writer is looking forward to the future. So here is faith, and the word faith in its usage has the full timeline. Where are you now? Where have you been, and where will you go? In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, just a few verses farther down, it says, "But without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." Okay? In this verse, it's talking about faith. It's talking about faith that you must have. And what does it say? It says you must believe that He is. Present tense, right? That you believe in God. Now, why would you put your conviction and your belief in God? Because of where you've been, your past, your experiences, your knowledge that you have gained that brought you to your present belief. But notice he says also faith embodies thinking about the fact that the God who gave a promise is also capable of fulfilling it. He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Now, in these passages in Scripture, did we see anything that related to against common sense? Did we see anything that related to, well, just you need to put trust in something? You don't have to worry what it is or what you know about it. You don't have to have any past experiences with it. You just have to trust it. Well, no. No, Scripture said that here is faith. It's a foundation. It's an assurance and conviction of where you currently are because of where you've been looking forward. Now, you might not know what comes in the future, but you have an assurance because of everything behind you. You have trust and confidence. You know, if we think about that word faith, in our common knowledge, we might say that we put faith in somebody. We put faith in dear friends. We put our faith in our spouse. We go to a doctor or to a surgeon we put our faith into their work, their abilities, their talents. Why? Well, with our friends and our spouse, we have this history. When we go to a doctor, oftentimes the first time we go and visit that doctor, we're evaluating. We're trying to see, does this man or woman, do they know what they're talking about? Does it look like they have the experience and the background and the knowledge? Because if I'm going to put my faith, my trust, my confidence, my conviction, I need to have that background experience to have current conviction to lead me in the future of where it's going. All right, one more verse to think about the Bible's view of faith and science. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. In Proverbs 1, verse 7, the proverb writer says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Okay? Do we recognize, is the word faith in this? No. Is the word science in this verse? No. Well, you might be asking, well, why are we looking at it? Well, is there another word that we've already talked about? All right? We have this word knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, all right? And we can understand the phrasing, the fear of the Lord. That is a sense of awe, a sense of respect, a sense of understanding that God exists, we're His creation, and we're looking to Him, right? So in that is a connection of faith, right? A recognition of who He was. That's what Hebrews 11 told us we need to have in our faith. And so it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Well, we talked about science is essentially the quest for knowledge, right? Seeking knowledge. And so when we look at and we think about what science is, in the Proverbs, this very first chapter, talking about wisdom and how to gain wisdom, he says that in order to gain wisdom, to grow, the beginning of that growth is believing in God and a quest for knowledge. If we were to look at this verse, now the word science is not in our English Bibles. You know, you flip through an English version of the Bible, you wouldn't find the word science, but the word science comes from a Latin root. If we were to pick up a Latin translation of the Scriptures, the Latin Vulgate, Proverbs 1 verse 7 would have a word that we would recognize. And here we see it, scientia. Hear this word, which obviously is connecting to science. Why? Because science means knowledge. And so if we were to look at this verse again, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of science, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. You see, science begins with God. That's the Bible's view. The Bible's view says that science and faith go together, that they are complementary, that they are both needed in a person's full life, and that faith is not this blindness to any knowledge or gaps in your knowledge. Instead, faith is an assurance and conviction because of the knowledge. All right, now let's turn and let's think about some atheistic views of faith and science. We talked about a general perception in the world that faith and science are mutually exclusive, completely independent, and almost shouldn't even cross paths. I want to show you an exchange between a student and a well-known scientist. The students asked the question in this question and answer period and said, "So you don't believe in God?" as a question to Dr. James Watson, one of the co-discoverers of the helix shape of DNA. "So you don't believe in God?" the question said. Look at what Dr. Watson responded. He said, "Oh no, absolutely not. The biggest advantage to believing in God is you don't have to understand anything. No physics, no biology. I wanted to understand." Okay, well, that's an interesting response. Dr. Watson looks at it and he says, well, if you believe in God, then that takes away the motivation to understand. It says, well, I believe in God and that is the answer, that's the end of all things. He said, I wanted to know about biology. I wanted to know about physics. I wanted to know about mathematics. I wanted to know how the world worked. And so I needed to set God aside, essentially what he's saying. Well, that is a God of the gaps mentality, but that's not what the Bible and Scripture says. And we'll look at that a little bit later. All right, as a second viewpoint from an atheist perspective, I want us to look at a quote by Stephen Hawking. Dr. Hawking said, "Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going." All right, so Dr. Hawking, an atheist, looks at it and he says, spontaneous creation, self-creation, coming from nothing, that's why we have the universe. We don't need God. We don't need him as a creator or an originator of what we have around us. So there's a separation in faith and in science, according to Dr. Hawking. I want us to now think about, and we're going to look at several quotes from some historical scientists. Now, I want to do that not to say that we believe a person's word. These are just men. These are just people. These are just scientists who lived their lives like you and I. And so they don't have some supernatural or inspiration to them. But I want us to look at the fact that this separation is arbitrary. In today's modern world, this division put in between faith and science, it wasn't always there. And so I want to hear from some well-known scientists of history past, and you'll recognize numerous of their names, I'm sure. And we'll look at and see the question of whether faith and science coming together was something that stopped the quest for knowledge, the gaining of new information. All right, our first scientist that I want us to look at is Johann Kepler. Johann Kepler, sometimes called the father of planetary motion. He came up and formulated Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which we understand as orbital dynamics, that now told us, orbits, they're not perfect circles. They're actually ellipses. Very important for mathematics and celestial mechanics. But here is a quote from Kepler. He said, "I thank thee, my Creator and Lord, that thou hast given me this joy in thy creation, this delight in the works of thy hands. I have shown the excellency of thy works unto man so far as my mind was able to comprehend thine infinity." Did you hear what he said? He said there was a joy that had been given to him. That joy was the creation, the delight of looking at all the heavens, looking at the stars. And what does he say? He ascribes the design to God. But here's a question. When Kepler ascribes and says, God did this, look at this wonderful creation, did that stop Kepler from investigating the details of that creation? Well, apparently not, because he formulated these wonderful laws that tell us about the orbit of the moon around the earth around the sun, all of the planets and bodies that orbit out in space. But wait a second. He merged a belief in God with his scientific inquiry, his questions. What do I look for? What is the data telling me? How do I obtain it? How do I look at it and lay it out and understand it? He did all of that process while also saying, the end of his quote, he tried to the best of his ability to express the excellency of God's works to those around him. So not only was he searching the heavens, not only was he assigning the design to God. He was trying to tell other people about it and about its origin. Okay, our second scientist from the past, Robert Boyle, there at the end of the 1600s. He is known as the father of modern chemistry. He formulated Boyle's law. Here is what he said. When with bold telescopes I survey the old and newly discovered stars and planets, when with excellent microscopes I discern the unimitable subtlety of nature's curious workmanship, and when, in a word, by the help of anatomical knives and the light of chemical furnaces, I study the book of nature, I find myself oftentimes reduced to exclaim with the psalmist, "How manifold are thy works, O Lord, in wisdom hast thou made them all." Robert Boyle says that when he looked into microscopes and he looked at the small details of creation, when he looks at how gases and liquids and fluids and chemicals, when in chemical furnaces he does his experiments, when he then turns to telescopes, not to look at the minute, but to look at the grand heavens, what does Boyle say? Well, he says that he's almost beside himself, right? When studying the book of nature, I find myself oftentimes reduced to exclaim, "How manifold are thy works," quoting Scripture. All right. When Robert Boyle went into his laboratories, remember, he's known as the father of modern chemistry. When he begins to mix his chemicals, looks at how gases operate, and he begins to explore, and all the while, he's exclaiming how wonderful they are, how God is this amazing creator who put the details into order and the design that is there. When Boyle does that, did it stop him from discovering scientific information? No, it didn't. By merging his faith and belief that there is a God with the fact that he is searching, right? He is searching the book of nature, he called it. Well, that book of nature and the book of God were both used when Boyle did his experimentation. So that brings a strange contrast when we think back to the quote of Dr. Watson when he said that he doesn't believe in God because he wanted to know science. Well, Kepler and Boyle, they knew science, but they also knew God. All right? Another famous scientist, one that you will probably recognize, Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, what a magnificent scientist, right? A Renaissance man almost. He discovered Newton's laws of motion. He discovered gravity and worked on the universal gravitation constant. But to do that kind of science, to develop that new method and that new understanding, he essentially had to invent calculus. There was another co-inventor, but he had to generate this formulation of mathematics because just to express the amazing design he saw in nature, he needed a new mathematical way to bring it about. And then he designed a different arrangement for a telescope, introducing the world to reflecting telescopes. But let's listen to what he said when he thought about what he studied in relation to God. Isaac Newton says, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." Notice that Newton, looking at the heavens, sun, moon, planets, and comets, what does he say about the Creator? Well, he says that Creator must be intelligent and the Creator must be powerful. He looked at creation and saw those attributes. And when he looked into Scripture, he saw that those attributes were also ascribed to God, matching what he saw with what he was reading in the special revelation of Scripture. Now, did faith and science, in Isaac Newton's perspective, did they need to be separated? You know, I can't invent calculus. I can't find these laws of motion because I've got this faith baggage weighing me down. That wasn't Newton's perspective. He said when he looked at it that it gave him motivation. It drove him even more to think about the Creator. All right, we're going to move forward a few years in time, and we're going to think about Max Planck. Max Planck is known as the father of quantum mechanics, all right? This was a development that extended Newtonian mechanics, all right? The mechanics that Newton discovered that works at large scales, but when you get into the minute region, we find that those laws, they're different because you're in a different range and scale. And so the father of quantum mechanics, Max Planck, listen to what he says as he thinks about faith and science. There can never be any real opposition between religion and science, he says, for the one is the complement of the other. Every serious and reflective person realizes, I think, that the religious element in his nature must be recognized and cultivated if all the powers of the human soul are to act together in perfect balance and harmony. All right? Notice in this quote the connection, very direct, that religion and science, the belief in God and the quest for knowledge, they're not in opposition. What does he say? He says the exact opposite. They complement each other. And then at the end of that quote, he uses the word harmony. Well, that's what we're talking about in this class, the harmony between faith and science. Another quote from Max Planck. He goes on and he says, both religion and science need for their activities the belief in God. And moreover, God stands for the former in the beginning, for the latter at the end of the whole thinking. Religion and science, he says, need for their activities the belief in God. Well, that is a complete contrast to what Dr. Watson and Dr. Hawking said. He says you need to have belief in God in both your religion and your science. And he says God stands for the former, right? Religion as the beginning. For the latter, science, it's the whole thinking, the end of the whole thinking. So he ties the two together. One more reference that this father of quantum mechanics has for us. He says, all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. All right? Dr. Planck said that it was this mind. When he looked out and saw and did his studies and evaluated our universe, one of the attributes of God that he saw was that God was mind, not physical, that he was the originator of all that we see. All right, now if we come to the 20th century, Wernher von Braun is sometimes called the father of rocket science. Here is a quote that he says, "It is as difficult for me to understand a scientist who does not acknowledge the presence of a superior rationality behind the existence of the universe, as it is to comprehend a theologian who would deny the advance of science. Far from being independent or opposing forces, science and religion are sisters. There is certainly no scientific reason why God cannot retain the same position in our modern world that he held before we began probing his creation with a telescope and the cyclotron. That is an amazingly direct statement. Again, similar to Planck, he says there is no opposition. Faith and science are sisters. They complement each other. It would be ridiculous to deny one from one vantage point or to deny the other. And notice how he ends. There is certainly no scientific reason why God cannot retain the same position in our modern world. What was he in reference to? He was in reference to the fact that these historical scientists that predated him, that came before him, whose shoulders he was standing on, they believed in God. Wernher von Braun says, there's no reason why we don't stand in the same place. Even before we had the cyclotron or the large telescopes, that's what they believed, and we should still today. And let's take that last reference to telescopes and things that we would see. One last quote. Alan Sandage. Dr. Sandage was an observational cosmologist who assisted Edwin Hubble, another famous astronomer. And here's what Alan Sandage has to say. He says, I find it quite improbable that such order came out of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but is the explanation for the miracle of existence. Why there is something rather than nothing. So here, when he studied the cosmos and he looked at the order, the arrangement, the design, things that existed, he said the organizing principle to all of this, the answer to the mystery, is God. Now, did that stop Dr. Sandage from doing some incredible cosmology, some incredible looking and evaluating the heavens? No. No, he says it came alongside. It was part of what he did. When he entered the observatory, the astronomer's laboratory, when he entered it, he didn't leave his faith at the door. He didn't dismiss all of his beliefs in God. And here is one additional thing that he goes on to say. He says Romans 1:19 through 21 seems profound. And the deeper any scientist pushes his work, the more profound it does indeed become. Romans 1:19 through 21, it tells to us about the understanding and the recognition of God and His attributes. Here is what it says, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Dr. Sandage says the more that a scientist pushes his work, what does that mean? That means the more he does investigation, the more he does experiments, the more he does collection of data and evaluation, he says the more profound this passage in Scripture becomes. So in this passage of Scripture, Romans 1:19 through 20, what is the Bible's view of God? It says that God has shown Himself to mankind. His attributes are seen in His creation. We, as the pinnacle of His creation, that we can understand it. What can we understand? His eternal power and His Godhead, so that we are without excuse if we deny God. All right. In conclusion, I hope that we have shown, breaking down this arbitrary wall that the world has constructed between faith and science. Both concepts are important to have as part of our lives, right? A quest for new knowledge, that's important. A strong conviction, trust in what we believe and also who we believe. You see, that is what we need. It doesn't necessarily matter who said these things, other than I hope you have seen that these well-known, famous scientists, for what they did in knowledge of physical things, they related it with God. And so we need to do the same, carry our faith and our science together to push forward into new knowledge. Please come back for our next class, and we'll see you then.